So initially when I was engaged to give an introduction, like a planning workshop with DIDMS, normally we do this with Gaia Resources and myself through Project Dieback. Gaia Resources have been really generous in co-supporting the administration as a sponsor for the DIDMS website. DIDMS sits on Gaia's grid platform, which is a geographic reporting information database. And initially it was set up for reporting and monitoring just NRM activities or any geographical activity. It was more for administration, but we adapted the tool and have developed it to use it for monitoring and sharing dieback information, management information, that sort of thing. And when we used to run the workshop, so we'd run a training day over about 3 hours. We could introduce people to DIDMS. We had about 10 to 12 people with 2 training people. And I found this span of control gets exceeded pretty quickly. And when I was told about the 45 people attending today, it's gone from a workshop to just a generic demonstration. But we'll try not to disengage you guys and just give you a little taster of what DIDMS can provide. And then for additional training, if you're interested in using DIDMS, there's some online training tools that Gaia developed for South Coast through Project Dieback, and that's all been funded through the state NRM program as well. They're on YouTube, so you can look at. Oh, sorry, they're the QGIS tools. They're QGIS tools. Can I ask everyone who's got a background, any basic background in GIS? Don't be shy, be confident. Yeah, I can do GIS. Yep, great. Because DIDMS is, if you have a little bit of a background in GIS, desktop GIS, it's a very powerful tool to work together in that regards. As far as I'm aware, there's no real capability yet for doing mobile data collection in a standardised manner for grid and DIDMS. Yeah, it's been worked on for a while. I build customised QGIS projects and use QField using the templates myself and build drop-down menus so that things are, and then just do a little bit of processing and put it up that way.
And also use iPads, it does work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, with QGIS and QField, you are generally restricted to an Android tool.
So some difficulties with the projector.
Okay.
Again,
so whilst we're doing the IT stuff, so through Project Dieback, initially it was set up to, one of the main things with the investment framework is using a concept of triage where you've got limited resources, and it can be seen as a good thing or a bad thing in conservation management and planning, but you just don't have enough resources to save everything. And I've worked in salinity programs, state salinity, where in the old grandcare days, you just see really good people, really passionate, doing a lot of work. But what we found, we called it spreading the Vegemite too thinly, and not really getting any enjoyment out of it. And if you're not a Vegemite person, well, the metaphor's lost. So through the Project Dieback side of things, we looked at threat and asset-based planning program. And the selection of the priority protection areas was, there is a conservation logic behind it there to represent the state's significant examples of biodiversity susceptible and threatened by. So it's not just picking the rare stuff or the bigger stuff, it's looking at what sort of different sub-regions have been selected and how threatened they are. There is a gap in the PPA system for the Swan Coastal Plain that is recognised just basically because it's been so heavily impacted and fragmented. So, but in terms of the process, there's no reason why, if you're working in a local government area or another NRM region, you couldn't produce your own PPAs using these planning tools for whatever you find is important. And we're up and running. Yeah. Sorry. Is that showing?
Yeah.
Here we go. Great. Nice. So we have some images here of the south coast where we're looking at saltwater Phytophthora planning tools and putting that into a spatial online system. We've got values that we look at. We've got hazard vectors, which I'll talk a little bit about more. Large landscapes, fire, even preparedness and mitigation, especially when everything hits the fan and you have wildfires in regional West Australia. It's really hard to have the capacity to bring in other issues such as dieback and those sorts of things when life and property are really important things. This little picture here in my bottom left. Yeah. This is some disease impact in some Quonga and Banksia speciosa shrublands, Stokes National Park. This is a bit of a doozy, this one. It's actually not Phytophthora cinnamomai sample area. So we initially set up dieback to be for Phytophthora cinnamomai, Phytophthora dieback, but it just became, we had a great access to great information through Vegetation Health Services, DVCA's Phytophthora database, and we could bring other Phytophthora points that have been sampled in the field and diagnosed in the lab. And so that's now spatially represented in DIDMS, which I'll take you through. And that's, so instead of being a dieback information management system, it's a plant disease dieback information system for people who get gangster with DIDMS. We'll talk a bit later. So yeah, the whole bringing back the Grim Reaper from the earlier dieback days and just rolling the dice, everything's a trade-off. So every time you have to go into hygiene, you pretty much need to be willing that that site will get infested, no matter how important it is to you. Once you get to the point of hygiene, you're opening up the values in that area to being impacted on. It's a great segue with the work that Catherine presented earlier on about soil-borne Phytophthora spread. We talk about pathways which it can move, and so the terminology for humans and animals moving, we call that vector spread, and autonomous spread for water movement and root to root. So where humans aren't so much involved, they might be indirectly involved, but we still refer to that as autonomous spread, and we can talk about that a bit later with our risk models. So the generic form for risk, you look at likelihood versus consequence, and then you have severity and those sorts of things. So who here has seen just the generic risk model? You guys in the room just use risk at all? Yeah. So one of the problems with that, it compartmentalises hazards and components, and you don't get integration between the two. So within Project Dieback, we're looking at internalising a management objective and the threat within the actual risk assessment, and where we get things like the susceptibility of vegetation, you then add in the different hazards in and around that will give you vulnerability. But you can have very susceptible vegetation sitting out in the landscape with no hazard or pathway for the disease to get to. It's not vulnerable, so it just makes a bit of a logical sense. And you're looking at the likelihood of goal failure, so you have a management objective. So it's not so much as how severe the risk is, it's looking at the risk of goal failure or success for your asset. So look at the threat. So the threat's basically where's your known disease points or disease areas of Phytophthora, and how are they linked to your assets. So the area might already be infested. So well, what can you do then working within an infested landscape, those values? And DIDMS will have information about that on disease points. There's a little bit of Phytophthora interpretation and some conditional older 2008 dieback mapping. And then there's the susceptibility of values that you're looking at as well. So where the threat is and then where the values are, how susceptible are those values? So you're not going to worry too much in terms of the impact maybe on things like carrick, but then carrick can also have the disease there, so or the pathogen can be within the carrick forest. So that's really important to note And then susceptibility and impact are quite similar things. So you're looking at what's the potential for that vegetation type, floristically, in terms of its structure, dominance, species composition, to be impacted on by the pathogen through disease expression. Now that impact, just because you might say we lose 30% of biomass within that area or lose its common species, you then convert that to a human value. So impact and consequence are different things. So you convert it to a human value that you're losing, that's where you're looking at the consequence. So the impact of fire might not necessarily, on the bushland, might not necessarily have a major consequence, even though you might be burning out that vegetation. It can be a beneficial thing. So hazards, spoke about looking at vectors. You're looking at your hazards in terms of your autonomous spread, being creeks, streams, rivers, swamps, wetlands, springs, root to root spread through autonomous spread. And then you have your vector spread, which is any human-induced pathway. And then you have the activity on top of that pathway. So you might have a road or a track, but what's the activity occurring there, or a mine site, or acreage, those sorts of things, tourism, recreation. So you're looking at the activity, the human activity on top of what that vector pathway is. So in terms of managing risk, you can either reduce the susceptibility of your values, and if it's vegetation, really the only thing open to us is phosphite. There's not much else we can do. Or we can manage hazards, and we can either mitigate hazards through looking at adding hygiene infrastructure, or we can remove the hazard altogether. And there's also preventing new hazards from going into those landscapes as well. So there's that the opportunity for new hazards to increase the vulnerability of your assets, whether it would have been a road going through the Fitzgerald National Park. That was a hazard that was prevented from being put in there. And then there's the threat itself, which you've heard little bits and pieces about with eradication or containment. Can you contain the infestation either inside your management boundary, the asset, or is it outside? So they're sort of examples of how the risk model works, and we take that ethos or those concepts, whether you're looking at green bridging, putting clean material over top of infested roads, or consolidating tracks just to one track, or removing tracks altogether. If you don't think like some of the explanations Dion presented, having temporary closures, increasing drainage, bird cleaning stations. Sampling's really important. You need to know, but it does help to know where the disease is or could be. And I'm sure how large this will come up. So we have a community risk reduction planning tool within Project Dieback. This is a simplified version of our priority protection area risk reduction planning tools, and it just is an impetus and gives you triggers of how to approach the planning. So it's management by objective. The value stuff is really important. So it's just working in dieback and conservation in general. We're pretty passionate people, and I've been reminded of an episode through my little girl. We watched a little TV show called Bluey. It's about a blue heeler dog, and the dad's a classic bandit. Grabs the kids, chucks in the car, just rips off to the swimming pool, and he forgets their lunch, forgets their water, forgets sunscreen, all that sort of stuff. But there's mum sitting back home, she rocks up and saves the day because she's the thinker, takes a deep breath and brings all the stuff. So in terms of having a bit more of a Zen approach to conservation planning, and just instead of flipping into that emotional side of things, getting out there doing what makes us feel really good. Sometimes it's good to take a deep breath and look at this strategically. So what are we looking at protecting? So what are the values of our assets and how susceptible they are to the plant disease? Defining an objective. So what's the outcome we want for the outcome we want for those values? Can we protect them, cover them, contain them, or You might even look for a similar value elsewhere in another part of the landscape. What's the current threat to those values? So what are the existing disease areas for Phytophthora, and what are the hazard pathways that link that threat to your values if they're not already there? So that gives us what we call a bit of a situation analysis, and then you're looking at how to manage that situation. So what tools do we have in our toolbox to manage that, to make that objective? And that's the second part of the template, where you start unpacking those hazards and the susceptibility, those things within the formula. So can you reduce your hazards? Can you mitigate them? Can you manage and mitigate the activities that occur in those hazard pathways? So everything from green card to even the dieback risk reduction planning, the raising awareness, looking at managing behaviours, compliance, those sorts of things all can fall into that field. And then there's the grey area, which is feasibility. So you don't have endless buckets of money, and it's great to do these things on paper, but you then might look at, well, what's the best bang for your buck? And if it's technically too complicated, or you don't have enough money to do what you want to do, you either adjust your management strategies or adjust your objective, or it might be walk away. So look for those values somewhere else. So you might save yourself a lot of time from doing that before just jumping out there in the field. And DIDMS can be used to help do that. So let's see how we go with DIDMS. So, who here's registered with DIDMS? Anyone? Yeah. Who here's used DIDMS or tried to use DIDMS in any capacity? Okay. Well, you can register and go online to look at DIDMS on dieback.net.au. And so once you log into DIDMS, you'll see these disclaimers in here. They're really useful prompts just to get your head around to start with, about the limitations and the recommendations of DIDMS. Everything from some of the constraints behind the information that registered Phytophthora dieback interpreters have to or can provide into the system for that side of things. And talk that. Just click accept. There's 4 components to DIDMS. So this is where you can add and edit data, view data through here, user data, user guide, which is useful. This can help show you how to add data into DIDMS, how to download templates and those sorts of things. And then there's the mapping and reporting side of tools, which is very powerful. So I'll just give you an overview for what we currently have sitting within DIDMS. This is much quicker than living in Esperance doing this. So before I zoom into anywhere, that's a bit of a tip. So whenever you have an interest, a site of interest within DIDMS and Grid, always, before you start turning everything on in DIDMS and wanting to kill your computer or internet connection, zoom to your area of interest before you switch it on. It's a really simple thing. So there's 3 components to DIDMS. There's this top bit, activities. So this is where people contribute and add their information. I'll go through that in a little bit more information. Then there's base layers. So this is generic state government, Commonwealth government data sets that we use, and data provided through DVCA data. Some of this you can download as well. We make that available. And then there's my layers. And my layers is where the user can add any sensitive information that they don't want anyone else to see. And that's, so if you wanted to do some planning within DIDMS, you could add some rare flora or some culturally sensitive sites, or you might have some imagery that you want that's specific to your sites. You can actually upload it within my layers as well. So we'll go through some of the logic in the base layers. So the base layers are useful for giving you a generic overview of your current situation with just some of the existing data sets in DIDMS. The reason I wanted to set my computer up, because I didn't realise I've actually got a little, I can use my screen to drag and slide in here. So we're just going to zoom into, we're just on the south coast here in Esperance, and that site I showed earlier on my presentation with behaviour change at Lake Montignac, down here. So within DIDMS, you've got a little bit of basic imagery that you can turn on straight away through Mapbox, and then you've got your base Google Maps. And and one of the other things, which is a little bit separate, but the site has been synced to the Geoscience Australia Sentinel hotspots. So over summer, if you open up DIDMS and turn that on, you'll see the active fire hotspots according to the Sentinel website. There's a few inaccuracies in it, but it's good to see when we turn on priority protection areas if there's any like running fires and that within those state priority protection areas. So you've got some imagery here you can look at. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. You can also view the state priority protection areas that we spoke about earlier. So you've got hotspots, uninfested areas. So they're all numbered through here, and then there's infested hotspots and supplementary hotspots. That's more broad scale strategic. But during the planning process, we established asset boundaries and management boundaries, and we use that same terminology when we do a little local area assessment as well. So turn that stuff off. I might see if I can just grab some water somewhere. So,
Cheers.
So within the base layers, we do have other information. There's some vegetation. They've got natural assets, so that's been more recently put in the Congan TC occurrence for the south coast, but it's very broad scale, so just bear that in mind. It's not completely accurate, but it's a good generic first pass indicator. I'll go through the geomorphometry in a bit. There's administrative boundaries, so everything from Ramsar sites to all the different parks and wildlife, conservation vestings. There's unallocated crown land and state NRM boundaries, public roads in here as well. So you can have a play with some of that side of things. And the vegetation sits under this section. There's a fair bit of information in here on vegetation. So let's zoom out a little bit to see how quick this loads up. So this is dense vegetation that's been classified as susceptible, very high susceptibility to Phytophthora cinnamomi. If and when that loads. No, it'll turn everything on. So yeah, there you go. So because this data's been collected, 1 is to 250,000. If you zoom in too far, it should turn itself off. So it's scale protected in that regard. So we get people saying, "Oh, we want to use that vegetation map," but we do try to use that to prevent people from shooting themselves in the foot using the information in a way that it's not meant to. There's some heavily cleared vegetation types through here, so 0 to 15%, 15 to 20%, those sorts of things. So you can just switch those on, have a play. Interesting stuff that people tend to, this is the hazard dispersion model, which is only for the south coast, but this links every Phytophthora disease point to a known autonomous or human vector spread pathway along linear points. So you can see Esperance is pretty high hazard in that regards, and that is brought upon by there's the public disease points on public lands. So turn those on there. These are all the Phytophthora points that sit within the database here. And also there's just have a look through all the different Phytophthora. There's a little bit of malaria information in here as well. And the main species that we put at the front end, these 1 to 8, we considered more or less have Phytophthora and Alarmites are given, but the other ones have potential impact on native ecosystems. These other ones are lesser known down here, so Amicola, Constrictor, Crassumura, those sorts of things. We're just not quite sure yet what sort of impact they're having in the landscape. As I said, there's disease mapping in here up to 2008, which is the old Dieback Atlas. This is very broad scale, and this will be the segue into I'll turn some of this off. Zooming in here, this is on the Lake Ward and Ramsar wetlands. So that was very broad brush mapping that was done, and since then we've had interpreters come in and do fine scale mapping, and there's actually a lot of protectable uninfested areas within some of these landscapes. So it's really important when you look at this disease confidence map in 2008, it's very broad brush as well, and it's not at the level of a registered Phytophthora Dieback interpreter. Don't try not to put too much onus that that whole area will be infested. So we have a little bit of data here that we've uploaded through Greg Freebury. He's done some dieback management activities. So this is a PC interpretation. And I'll turn off these areas here. No, it's not going to play ball. So when you go into DIDMS, if you're adding data in Phytophthora data or interpreted data that's been collected by a registered interpreter, when the infested data is older than 3 years, Guy has built in an algorithm which just clicks the date over. It just says it's infested, but it needs review. So it's no longer current. And after 12 months, it'll flick over for uninfested areas that have been mapped as well. It still may be well and truly suitable for what you want to use it for, but it's just to protect the interpreter who's collected information not being used out of context as well. So within these disease activities, you can add your own threat information up here. So we've got disease status information collected by Phytophthora and registered interpreter. And then we have disease points, which can be added into the system as well in more detail. So they're the sample points here. So these are information that the individual can add in. So, and you can, as different to the, you have an identification tool, different to the base layers, you get a lot more information in here potentially about the type of plant that was sampled. Let's see if it's going to bring up a. So this is a sample that I took ages ago, back in 2018 for a Ramsar project. I sampled a Lambertia enormis. It was, the lab name was VHS. They used the baiting method. The impact was moderate, and there's some comments there that it was a combination, or it was a composite sample, so it was a sample of a few different species there. And then there's a site photo as well. So anyone who registers, and there's a photo of the actual Lambertia, of the chitty that was sampled. So this is where DIDMS gets to be quite powerful. You can have a lot more information. Anyone can download this data within this group, and you can look at it if you want to build up a portfolio of photos of disease expression and things like that. So that gives you information on the disease data, and I'm going to move more back in now to so these are your threats. So you can add in disease points, you can add in interpretation mapping for this data set. And I'm just going to turn on, we'll zoom into the Lake Wandjinup area. I'm going to use a base layer for some of this information at the moment as well. So some high confidence mapping. Imagery. You can start building up a picture. So what I did here earlier on is I prepared what some of the values were and uploaded these off on my GIS. I uploaded these into DIDMS. So we should have in here. That's no problem. I'll sign in as an administrator, so this thing is showing that shouldn't have been showing. So you can start building up that picture within those planning templates to do a situation analysis within DIDMS. You can add values. So down at this site, there's some pre-mapping that I've worked on before. So this is some Condon TC through here. You can set your own how you want the. There is a little bit of editing capability for symbology within the DIDMS tool, and just using the base layers, you can turn on things like the disease of points on public lands. So just turn all those on at the moment. So we've got two Phytophthora cinnamomai points here, and we've got some pseudocryptogaea up in the northeastern side, and then might want to get a bit of feel. So we've got some disease data within there for a couple of points, but then there's some confidence mapping, and that shouldn't, hopefully that won't show up because I'm too zoomed in, and then I can look at interpretation mapping, non-current, if there's been some work there. So there's some work done on some interp here. Go, okay, who collected that? How old is that interp data? Click on the ID tool for that. It's just a bit slow at the moment. And then you can start adding things like hazard information. So under this geomorphometry is where you'll find things like your waterways, so your water, your creek. This is a typical might have broken my golden rule and had too many things turned on. So when you hit the ID button, anything in that view, it's going to try and find out all the information. Will give you a list of all those features that occur in that view. And at the moment, grid is a little bit slow on the upload for that side of things. Typical. I'm going to turn some stuff off here. Actually, I've got a lot of stuff on. So what I'm trying to show here at the moment is that you can look at the black areas being your potentially protectable areas. You can add in your hazards. So we've got some hazard pathways down here. Human vector hazards. The fire break running through there. So these are all areas I've mapped off the, you can map these in DIDMS live with the imagery underneath. So if I turn the imagery on, we can, and then I'll just show you, we can zoom in. It's like all the tracks and trails. You can even map kangaroo trails if you wanted to. And within DIDMS, you can then target them as, there's an actual hazard section up here in your activities. And you can look at, these are hazards. You've got autonomous hydrology hazards, vector hazards, drainage points, lines and polygons for humans. So you can see where you have bog holes along tracks and trails, and that sort of stuff's really important. And then your vector here, you get everything from bare raw material pits, campsites, car parks, communication towers, fence lines, fire breaks, mine sites, mining drill sites, exploration, and then there's an other as well. So if there's not listed in here, so even revegetation works or any conservation works, if you're doing trapping or monitoring, or even going in doing dieback assessments, there's a degree of hazard associated with that, and you can place that into your map. So you can start building a picture. You've got your values, you've got your hazards, turn on your streams, hazard areas, and car parks, and there is some contour information in DIDMS as well, and I'll show you that at the moment it's about 1:10 metres. So if you turn on contour lines here, we'll zoom in a little bit. You see the contour lines are quite far apart, and it doesn't give you a good feel for your landscape. So you can add in other contours, or you can try some of these other tools where we have slopes greater than it's hill shade. You turn on landfall slope information, and hill shade information as well. So this landform model that's about to turn on. So that's turning on the DEM. There's lots of really useful tools in this geomorphometry side of things, where you can look at your slopes greater than 2% for shedding landscapes for water runoff, and then there's another tool in here that will allow you to look at your ridges and valleys and those sorts of things in here. Okay, let's just zoom out a little bit. So once you start building up a picture, if you want to add data, and I'll quickly show you just add data in this section here. You can bulk upload, you can import your own data, or you can use the geos templates. So within this section here, you just say if you had some infested data, or you got a big drop-down menu. These are all your dieback management pathways. So these are some of the things you can look at. So if you want to manage car park management points, green bridging, road track management, have a look through here. You can see all the different management points that you can add in, or lines or polygons. And then surface water management for campsites, catchment drainage, fire breaks. There's a lot of things you can add into DIDMS if you're making your own management maps and situation maps. And then things like the hazards as well, so this is where you can add your hazards in, any other disease information, planning boundaries. So we say proposed protectable and proposed unprotectable because the DVCA had their own specific system for assigning protectability and unprotectability to areas, so we just keep this quite generic. So any environmental practitioner can have a go, so as long as you can justify why you think it's protectable or unprotectable from Phytophthora dieback. So we can add those things in there. That's where we add our data in real time. So for example, let's just have a look at if you wanted to put in some green bridging on a road or in a car park, you can zoom in here, click on add feature, to make it along this road. If you want to do a bit of green bridging in the car parks right here, you can click on this little bit, double click, and you can edit those sorts of things. And then what you get in DIDMS is so you can have green bridging a road, track, walk, trail, or other. We could say green bridging other here, and then just type in car park. So where there's an asterisk, it's you have to fill that field in. And so here it says status of the activity, and we can say, well, it's not in, but we want to propose it as a planning process. So put in proposed, the date of the activity or when it was put in. You can just click on the calendar for there, and organisation that implemented the work. So you can have either South Coast NRM or Esperance Shire. So
for that one. I'm proposing to do the work. So as long as you fill in those mandatory fields, you can go from there. So I'll just click apply. So, and then you have this now will sit inside the database. That one. And then you can create, we'll go back and we can create some maps for mapping and reporting. I'll just show you this last bit, how to do mapping and reporting. In this little tool here for mapping and reporting, the base layer info, you can download the public VHS Dieback points, and you can also download the PPAs yourself and use them in your own GIS tool. If it's got download here, download the base layer, it's downloadable, and then there's metadata as well. So that's, you just click through there, there's a lot of information that you can already download for your own use. And then to produce a map, go back to map reporting. This is the site where the area where you make a map. It makes a little PDF map and downloads it to your desktop. So I might zoom that out a little bit. And project item. We can give it a title. We might call this. I'll call this a SIG map. That's just funny. And at the moment, you want to make sure this is. If you haven't seen the little orange, make sure the orange box. So at the top you can adjust preset or predefined sizes. So that's. And just go download. And this will create a map that will already have itemized, an itemized legend, and we'll have Project Dieback on it, but you can adjust it if you needed to. So let's just show you this in the folder. And that's how quick and easy it was to make your own map once you add things in. So I have a little legend down here. You can also change in DIDMS between these things and organs or UTMS zone 51 to long and lapse, depending on how you want to look at the data. You can download the templates within DIDMS as well. So there's lots and lots of things you can do. But before I go too far into DIDMS, what we might do is show you where you can get access to further training and support, which is being developed at the moment. So Guy will be doing a couple of grid training videos, and South Coast NRM are looking at doing some Dieback planning videos, which will show you how you can use these tools a lot more effectively in creating getting through those templates that I spoke about before. So I'll just leave it at that. Are there any other questions? Any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
What are the sources of data for your Dieback?
Yep. So in the base layers, there's a metadata report which provides that. So that data has come from the Forest Management Branch, FMB, Department of DBCA. So that's the source of the data for the base layer data. The disease points, which sit within base layers, come from Vegetation and Health Services. And then with the activity data, any, a local government or a government agency or a private business can put Dieback interpretation mapping up into there, but it has to be done by the data's originally going to be collected by a registered Phytophthora and Dieback interpreter. That's really important. Yeah. Apologies for it being so dry. But if you're registered, go and have a play. You can try and add in your own data in real time. You can't break DIDMS really in terms of that regards. I'd say if you need further support, you can either contact South Coast NRM. If there's enough demand there, you've got Gaia Resources. Hey, it popped up at last. So yeah, so then you can contact Gaia Resources or through South Coast NRM about grid training and from the Dieback planning side of things, be some more Dieback planning tools. If you have any questions about the disease data, you can, under the help tools, you can download PDF which explains everything about the disease data in here as well. So this little document here will explain that. And if you want to know about the geomorphometry products with the slope maps and the landscape mapping models, those explanations are in the help section as well.
Any other questions for Tilly?
I've popped these on people's
Yes.
desks.
Yep.
Could you maybe spend 5 minutes just explaining how that tool would be used with DIDMS and
Yeah, definitely. So on your desk you'll have the community risk reduction planning template. So that's a simplified version. You can do a rapid appraisal of any asset area primarily. So looking at what outcomes, everything from setting an objective. So where DIDMS fits into this, there's a series of maps. So you do your asset map, looking at your values. Then what's your current situation of that map in terms of where are the disease locations. This is where DIDMS can help you produce those maps very quickly. And then within the DIDMS management tools, those activity layers, you can then add in your hazards. Okay, what are the hazards? What roads, fire breaks, any gravel pits, those sorts of things can go into that map, and then you can start populating the maps within that template using DIDMS quite effectively. And then the next stage will be your management map, and then by doing that you can then say, well, what's if we conceptually took out this road or ripped it or closed it or added in hygiene cleaning stations, those sorts of things. You can add all those into your map quite quickly. There is an example in there, a case study, which just takes you through roughly how to fill those in as well, those community risk reduction planning tools.
If anyone needs a copy of that too, just contact Nia. And also setting up DIDMS accounts as well, just he is able to provide that for new users. Thanks, Tila.
No worries.
We'll